Okay, so we talked about chapters 7 and 8. Today, now we want to talk about chapter 9. And chapter 9 talks about forecasting exchange rates. So first of all, why do we care about forecasting exchange rates? There are several reasons why we might want to do that. The first is we want to decide whether to hedge foreign currency cash flows. So what does it mean? So what we mean here is that let's say you're a company like Apple. So they are an exporter. So what really matters to them is a strengthening dollar. So if the dollar strengthens, they're going to get less money when they convert the cash flow back into US dollars. So given that, they would want to hedge if the exchange rates of the US dollar strengthens against other currencies, but if it weakens, it doesn't matter to them. So that is one reason why we are saying forecasting the exchange rate is important. The second thing is that when a company invests, let's say in China or in Mexico, they're going to stay there for a long time. It could be 5 years or 10 years. So they need to have cash flow forecast. So when you forecast cash flows, we need to figure out how much they make in the foreign currency. Also, we need to forecast the future exchange rates because that makes a difference. So that will be a second case. And the last one is deciding whether foreign subsidiaries should remit earnings. So companies like Apple and Starbucks and Google, they have a lot of money in other countries. So one of the issues they have is, should they bring it back to the US or should they keep it in the foreign currency? So they might want to bring it back when the US dollar weakens. So that would be one consideration. Clearly, tax would be another consideration. Okay. So all of these actions or all of these activities actually are meant to increase the dollar cash flows and increase the firm value. So the equation I have here, that basically says that the value of the firm is the present value of the future cash flows. So we need two things. We need to figure out the future cash flows and multiply them by the expected spot rate, and the denominator, that would be the weighted average cost of capital. So all the things we talked about so far, they will increase the future cash flows. Now the last one, that talks about financing, and what is the motive here? The motive here is that if the US dollar is expected to strengthen against the other currencies, it might be worthwhile for a US firm to issue bonds or stock outside the country, because as the exchange rate goes up in value, their financing gets cheaper. So that we are talking about decreasing the cost of capital. Okay. Now what we want to do here is that we want to do a little bit about statistical forecasting, regression analysis. So we have a regression here, and the regression we have here is basically, it tells you that the future spot rate, how it is related to the current exchange, the current forward rate. Or what we are doing here is that, is the forward rate a good predictor of the future spot value? Okay. So that is what we are trying to do here. So ST is given by A naught plus A1 times the forward rate plus the mu t. And in this case, A naught is the intercept, A1 is the regression coefficient, the beta the slope, and mu t stands for an error term that should be equal to 0, okay, on average. And that's what we are trying to do here. So what we try to do here actually has two meanings. The first is that is A1 economically significant, and the second one is A1 statistically significant? So economically significant means that, is it large enough so that the forward rate is a good predictor of the future spot rate, and the second is it statistically significant? Okay. Now we also talked about chapter 10, and what did chapter 10 do? So chapter 10 talks about two things. The first is, it talks about how to figure out the risk of a portfolio, and I think there is basically just one equation you want to worry about, and that would be to figure out the standard deviation of a portfolio. And we are talking about figuring out the standard deviation of a two currency portfolio. So if you took investments, essentially we are doing something similar to finding out the standard deviation of a two stock portfolio. So how do you do that? That is given by the weight in the first stock. So WX stands for the weight in the first currency or the weight in the first stock times the standard deviation of that currency, plus WY stands for the weight or the fraction of the second currency multiplied by the standard deviation of that currency, Then we have Wx, Wy, the weights, sigma x, sigma y, the standard deviation, and the last term is the correlation between x and y. So basically that tells you how the two currencies move together. So one of the things you want to make sure is that I think on my courses or on Blackboard, I think under the chapter 10 folder you have some examples with answers. You want to make sure you can figure out the standard deviation of a portfolio. So chances are it's going to be a two-part question. In the first part you want to figure out the standard deviation of the portfolio, and in the second part you have to figure out the value at risk. So what is the value at risk? So basically value at risk means that what is the maximum loss you can have during a particular time period at a particular confidence level. So what he mean here is that the maximum loss could be a dollar loss, or it could be a percentage loss. The time period could be 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, and so on. And the confidence interval here, typically we talk about two confidence intervals. One is the 95% confidence level, and the second is the 97.5% confidence level. So what I have here is that I have like a graph, and I think one of the things you might be a little bit concerned about is that if you took a course in statistics, it'll tell you that the 97.5% confidence level is a higher number and the 95% is 1.96. Now what is different here is that we are only looking at one side, and the one side is the left side. We are only concerned about the loss. So that is why the numbers are different. We are talking about the maximum loss you can have on a daily basis, or perhaps a weekly or a monthly, and we want to talk about at a 95% confidence level or a 97.5% confidence level. And how do you do that? That is given by the expected change. So what you believe will happen minus the confidence interval. So we have 95% or 97% multiplied by the standard deviation. So here this should be a multiplication. Okay, that will tell you the most you can lose. So if you find the answer as a percentage, you want to convert that into perhaps a decimal. And if you're talking about receiving $1 million and so on, that way you can use this number to forecast the maximum you can lose. I think one thing you want to be careful about is that unless you get this part correct, okay, so this part is we want to talk about the standard deviation of the portfolio. In the second part you are going to use this number as the standard deviation. So you want to be very careful about the first part, otherwise the whole question would become wrong. Okay, so that's what we have. And now let's go back and talk about chapter 11. I think chapter 11 we already did talk about that with reference to exam 1, so it's going to be there for exam 2, and chances are for exam 3. So what is we talked about 3 ways you can hedge. The first one is a money market hedge. So you want to think about, go back and see what we did with reference to a money market hedge. So what we said is that if you owe €1,000,000, okay, so let's say you owe €1,000,000 in 1 year. What do you do here? What we try to do here is that we want to convert today and invest in Europe. Okay, so that is what we do here in the case of the money market hedge. So what do we need to find out? We want to find out the present value of the payment in euros. Okay, so how much we owe today if we put it in a bank. So and then we want to multiply this by the current exchange rate. So that way, once we have the present value in euros, you can basically take the present value in euros, okay, and multiply it by today's spot rate. That will tell you the present value dollar cost of this obligation. Okay, the second is we talked about a forward market hedge. We also talked about an options market hedge. So in the case of a forward hedge, okay, what do we do there? So in the case of a forward hedge, cost is going to be, okay, obligation, so how much we owe, multiplied by the forward rate. Okay, so that is the easiest case. So if you have to make a payment, we buy a forward contract. If you are going to receive a payment, you sell the forward contract. So accounts payable, buy, accounts receivable, sell. Okay, and the amount you receive or the amount you have to pay would be the obligation multiplied by the forward rate. So what we find here is that the cost is going to be, regardless of exchange rate, your cost is always the same. Okay. Now in the case of the options hedge, so if it's an accounts receivable, okay, you want to buy a put option, okay, and if it's an accounts payable, you want to buy a call option. Okay. And what is the formula for the call? So the formula for the call is to decide whether to exercise. That is given by the maximum of 0, the spot rate minus the strike price. Okay, that is what that is the decision. And for a put option, that is given by maximum of 0 and the strike price minus the current exchange rate. So this will tell you whether you want to exercise or not. So what it tells you here is that if the spot exchange rate is higher than the strike price, you will exercise. Okay. And if the spot exchange rate is lower, you walk away. And when you walk away, what happens is you lose the call price or the call premium. Now in the case of the put option, that is given by maximum of 0 and the strike price minus the spot exchange rate. And when the strike price is greater than the spot exchange rate, that is when you exercise for the put option. So these are the two things. Again, I definitely encourage you to go back and look at the formulas and the examples we did in chapter 11. Okay, so that is pretty much summarizes what you can expect for this exam. And I just want to go back and say that, if you go back to the first PowerPoints we looked at, so this would be roughly the type of questions you can expect. So 2 from chapter 7, 2 from chapter 8, 1 each from chapter 10 and 11, and chapter 9 would be the least important in terms of the bigger problems. And the format, as I said before, is going to be 15 short questions, 2 points each, and 5 to 6 problems. That would be 12 points each. Okay, thank you. Good luck.